This week marks Freedom to Read Week across Canada, and this morning we're celebrating some of those banned or challenged books. And to do that, we're joined by our resident reader, Vikki Vansickle. Great to have you here.
Good morning.
So I didn't realize that books could be banned or challenged in Canada.
Yes, definitely. So sort of if someone receives a challenge at a library or sort of a public school, then a board, usually the people on the library, will decide whether or not to keep it in the collection. So the books we're talking about today are all books that have received some sort of challenge in Canada and also some of them in the United States.
All right, well, let's start with picture books. You've got one here that was challenged in the U.S.
Yes, recently. Pink and Blue and You is all about gender and gender stereotypes. It's by Elise Gravel. I love Elise Gravel. I've talked about her here before. She has a very clear, plain-spoken approach to things, and this has a very sort of graphic style, which kids can really connect to. So it's a great sort of introduction to the idea of gender, also gender stereotypes, and talking about what makes you feel most comfortable.
Vikki, when people are challenging or asking for a book to be banned, what are the topics that you find typically nowadays that face that?
They often represent what's going on sort of culturally right now, and right now that has a lot to do with sex and gender, especially for children, and in Canada, Indigenous content as well.
Interesting. All right, for preteens, you've got 4 books here, starting with Sex is a Funny Word.
Sex is a Funny Word. I think this is a great title. This is sort of presented as a series of comics, and again, it's all about sort of sex, the body, feelings, consent, and relationship. It's structured in a really great way where you can read it with an adult or a parent, and there's a lot of questions it asks people to think about. So very reflective, very funny, very informal approach.
And what would the challenge be on a book like this?
So the idea, I think, when it comes to sex is appropriateness, age appropriateness. So everyone has a different opinion of when you should introduce a subject. This is recommended for 8 to 12, and sometimes I think people feel like this is information that should come from a parent, not necessarily from a book.
Got it. Speaking of parenting and children, we've got one for teens up next.
Yes, so this one here, this is 3 Wishes, Children from Israel and Palestine Speak. This was originally published in 2004, and it's a collection of first-person accounts of children living in either the Palestinian territories or Israel. And a lot of people took some issue with this. It's very graphic. They talk a lot about what it's like to live in a war zone and how they feel about people on opposite sides. But Deborah Ellis is also a social justice advocate.
Yeah.
And I think she did a really great job looking at both sides from an actual child's perspective.
Okay, so I get challenging books for teens and children. I understand the motive that would be behind that. But what about books for adults? Books for adults
can be anything from language. People really can get really discomfortable with language. So Essex County, which is by Jeff Lemire. This is the biggest collection. There are 3 graphic novels in this one. There's a lot of language in it. It's actually a really lovely story about a few generations of a family growing up sort of in a farm community near Essex County. But people sometimes see language they find offensive or violence depicted. And even for adult books, some people can find that's too much, and then it'll cause them to challenge a book.
Milk and Honey is a book that I'm familiar with. Great poetry.
Great poetry.
Great Canadian.
Rupi Kaur, amazing Canadian, international star now. This has been challenged recently as last year, because she talks about sexual assault. It's very much a book about healing and consent and sort of learning to love again. But a lot of people find that material should not be in a book. Because a lot of teenagers, I think, also read Milk and Honey, I think there's a piece there where that age appropriateness comes back in again.
When a book is challenged or asked to be banned, is it immediately pulled from shelves? Is there an
Not
investigation?
necessarily. Sometimes there's an investigation. So The Great Bear, this is a book by Dave Robertson. It's in a middle grade series about 2 Indigenous kids who have sort of a portal world where they go back and explore Indigenous culture. This was challenged by the Durham District School Board. There was a question of whether the content was appropriate. And so it was taken from the shelves at first, but then it was found to be, the group decided to put it back out, and it was back out. It is now available. So it really depends on the system and how comfortable they feel. Sometimes with the school system, I find schools can be a little more likely to take books back while they make that decision.
This has been a fascinating conversation, Vikki. Thanks so much. I learned something about the Freedom to Read Week, banned and challenged books, and where you can get them and the content of all of them. Thanks, Vikki.
You're welcome.
Great to have you here. By the way, you can find all of Vikki's picks on our social media.
Hey, thanks for watching. If you liked this, be sure to subscribe here, or you can check out more Your Morning videos right here.